The Great Hall was enormous. It was so big that a human could stand inside it and feel like a grain of sand on a beach. The ceiling went up so high that clouds formed near the top. The walls were made of black stone that shone like glass. Strange lights floated near those walls, casting a cold blue glow across everything. There was no warmth in that light. There was no warmth in that room at all. The hall belonged to the Galactic Empire. It was the room where the Empire made its biggest decisions. Wars had been started in this room. Entire planets had been wiped from star maps in this room. Civilizations far older than humanity had bowed their heads in this room and never raised them again. Today, it was humanity's turn. The chamber was filled with representatives from over 200 member species of the Empire. Some had 6 arms. Some had no eyes. Some breathed gases that would kill a human in seconds. So they sat inside clear pods that hummed softly. There were creatures with skin like tree bark and creatures that looked like living shadows. All of them were watching. All of them were quiet. At the far end of the hall, on a throne that sat on a raised platform 50 steps high, sat the Emperor. His name was Vorkon III. He was of the Drath species. The Drath looked like tall, thin insects that had learned to walk like men. His body was wrapped in dark robes threaded with gold. His compound eyes reflected the light of the hall in hundreds of tiny pieces. He had lived for over 400 years. He had ended more wars than most civilizations had ever started. He was not a being who was used to being ignored. In the center of the hall, at a single small table that had been placed there on purpose to make it look small and lonely, sat humanity's envoy. His name was Marcus Hale. Marcus Hale was 53 years old. He had gray at his temples and a short beard that he had not trimmed in a few days. He was wearing a plain dark suit, not a military uniform, not ceremonial robes. Just a suit, like a man going to a quiet meeting on a Tuesday morning. He had a cup of something warm sitting on the table in front of him. It was tea. He had brought his own tea, and he was reading a newspaper. Not a digital screen, not a data pad. An actual printed newspaper made of actual paper, folded neatly in the way that people used to fold them a very long time ago. The paper was slightly yellowed at the edges. It made a soft rustling sound every time he turned a page. The herald of the Empire stood at the base of the great throne. He was a tall Drath soldier in polished armor. He had just finished reading the official declaration of war. Every word had been chosen carefully. Every sentence had been designed to strike fear into the heart of whoever heard it. That the declaration spoke of the Empire's endless fleets, its weapons that could crack planets, its armies that had never lost a war in 600 years of conquest. When the herald finished, the entire hall went silent. Every pair of eyes, every cluster of compound eyes, every sensor and organ that different species use to observe the world, all of them turned to Marcus Hale. Marcus turned a page of his newspaper. He snickered. It was not a loud sound. It was a small, quiet sound. Like a man who had just read a joke in the back pages and found it mildly amusing. He shook his head slightly, the way a person does when something is funny but not surprising. Then he took a sip of his tea. The silence in the hall became a different kind of silence. Before, it had been the silence of waiting. Now it was the silence of confusion, of disbelief. The herald blinked his large eyes. He looked up at Emperor Vorkon. The Emperor had not moved. His golden robes were completely still. His compound eyes were fixed on the small human at the small table. One of the ambassadors near the back of the hall, a round creature from the Pelori system with pale green skin, leaned toward his neighbor and whispered something. His neighbor whispered back. Neither of them could quite believe what they had just seen. A general in the Empire's War Council, standing along the left wall in full military armor, felt something strange move through him. He was not sure what the feeling was, and he had stood in this hall for 30 years. He had watched entire delegations weep, beg, or go silent with terror when the declaration was read. He had never seen anyone snicker. The herald cleared his throat and looked at Marcus again. "Envoy of humanity," he said in the common tongue, his voice careful and controlled. "You have heard the declaration of the Galactic Empire. Do you have a response to deliver to your people?" Marcus set the newspaper down on the table. Now he smoothed it with one hand. He took another small sip of his tea. Then he looked up at the herald. His eyes were calm. They were not brave eyes trying to look calm. They were just calm, the way a man's eyes look when he is sitting in a comfortable chair at home and someone knocks on his door. "Sure," Marcus said. "Tell me when you are ready, and I will pass the message on." The herald stared at him. "We have just declared war upon your species, your planets, and your people." "I heard," Marcus said. He picked up the newspaper again. "Is that all you have to say?" Marcus seemed to think about this for a moment. "I suppose I could ask a question," he said. "Ask," said the Emperor. It was the first time Vorkan had spoken. His voice was deep and dry, like stones rubbing together far underground. The word filled the hall completely. Marcus looked up at the throne. He looked up all 50 steps without tilting his head much, which itself seemed strange. Most beings who looked at the Emperor tended to shrink a little. Marcus just looked. "How long did your fastest scout ship take to reach our system and come back to give you information about us?" Marcus asked. The Emperor was quiet for a moment. 8 months, he said. Marcus nodded slowly. He looked down at his newspaper. He found his place again. "That is what I thought," he said quietly, almost to himself. He turned a page. Nobody in the hall spoke for a long moment. Yet outside the great hall, through the black walls and the floating lights and the cold stone, space was dark and full of stars. Somewhere out among those stars, far from this place, something was already moving. It had been moving for quite some time. It had been moving quietly, without any lights, without any signal that any of the Empire's scouts could have picked up. 8 months was a long time. A lot could happen in 8 months. Marcus took a sip of his tea and kept reading. And after the declaration was read, and the envoy gave his quiet, almost bored response, the hall did not know what to do with itself. The 200 representatives sat in their seats and shifted and whispered. The military generals stood straighter, as if good posture might help them understand what had just happened. The herald stood at the base of the throne steps and looked like a man who had practiced a speech for months, only to find that his audience had fallen asleep. But Emperor Vorkan sat still on his great throne and watched Marcus hail. Marcus had finished the page he was reading. He folded the newspaper neatly and set it on the table beside his empty cup. Then he folded his hands on top of the newspaper and waited. He looked like a man sitting in a waiting room, comfortable, patient, slightly bored. Vorkan descended the steps. This was not a common thing. The Emperor of the Galactic Empire did not usually walk down from his throne to speak to anyone. And that was what the steps were for. The steps were there to remind everyone of the distance between the Emperor and everyone else. When he came down those steps, every being in the hall noticed. Some of them leaned forward. Some of them held very still. Vorkan walked across the smooth black floor toward the small table in the center of the hall. He was tall, even for a Drath. His footsteps made a soft clicking sound. His golden robes moved quietly around him. Then he stopped about 3 body lengths from the table and looked down at Marcus. "You are either very brave," the Emperor said, "or very foolish." Marcus looked up at him. "People keep saying that to me," he said. "I have never been sure which one it is." One of the generals along the wall made a sound. It might have been a cough. It might have been a laugh that was stopped very quickly. Vorkan's compound eyes caught the light. "Do you understand what has just been declared in this room?" What, do you understand what the Empire's war machine looks like? Have your people seen our fleets? Some of them, Marcus said. The ones your scouts let us see. There was a pause. What does that mean? The Emperor asked. It means your scouts showed us the ships you wanted us to see, Marcus said simply. The ones parked near the outer edge of your territory. The ones that are very large and very shiny, and meant to be impressive. He scratched the side of his neck. They are impressive. By the way, very shiny. The Emperor was quiet for a moment. Around the hall, the whispering had stopped completely. Every creature that could hold its breath was holding its breath. You are saying, Vorkan said slowly, that you believe we were showing you only part of our strength. I am saying everyone does that, Marcus said. We do it too. It is not a criticism. It is just a thing that people do. You show your neighbor your nice car, not the broken one in the back. A normal. Vorkan stared at him. After a long moment, he spoke again. Your species has 17 planets. We have over 4,000. Your oldest warship is 40 years old. Our newest warship was built yesterday. Your total population is 11 billion. We represent 400 trillion beings across the galaxy. He paused. And you are sitting here reading a newspaper. Marcus looked at the newspaper on the table. Then he looked back at the Emperor. It is a good newspaper, he said. A small, strange sound moved through the hall. It was not quite laughter. It was something in between surprise and disbelief. The Emperor did not find it amusing. General Harrock, he said without turning his head. A Drath general stepped forward from the left wall. He was enormous, even by Drath standards, his armor thick and dark, his bearing the kind that comes from commanding real battles in real wars. What, my Emperor? Tell the envoy what our first fleet alone is capable of. General Harrock looked at Marcus. His voice was flat and professional, the way a very dangerous man's voice often is. The first fleet consists of 9,000 warships. The smallest among them can destroy a city from orbit in under a minute. Our flagship, the Eternal Conquest, carries weapons capable of splitting the crust of a planet. We have used them. We have used them 12 times in the last century. There are 12 dead worlds at the edge of our territory that were once full of life. Marcus listened to all of this. He nodded slowly, the way a person nods when someone is giving them directions and they are trying to remember them. That is a lot of ships, he said. 9,000, Harrock repeated, as if Marcus had not understood the number. I heard you, Marcus said. 9,000, yes. And that is only the first fleet, Harrock said. We have 7. 7 fleets, Marcus said. All right. Do you have something to write with? Harrock asked. His voice had taken on a strange edge. Perhaps you should be writing this down. I will remember, Marcus said. The Emperor walked back toward his throne. He did not climb the steps. He stood at the base of them and turned around and looked at the envoy from across the hall. We will give you 3 days, he said. You will take our message back to your people. You will tell them that the Empire has declared war. You will tell them they have 30 days to begin the process of surrender. Full surrender. Every planet, every ship, every resource, every person. After 30 days, the first fleet will begin its advance. Marcus stood up from the table. He picked up the newspaper and tucked it under his arm. He picked up the empty cup. He looked around the hall for a moment, as if trying to remember where the exit was. Then he looked at the Emperor one more time. I will pass on the message, he said. Good, said the Emperor. Can I ask one more question? The Emperor made a small gesture with one thin hand. Go ahead. In your 600 years of conquest, Marcus said, how many civilizations have you given a warning to before attacking? Vorkan considered this. All of them, he said. It is tradition. It gives them a chance to surrender without bloodshed. And how many of them surrendered? Most of them, the Emperor said. And the ones that did not? They are gone, the Emperor said. Marcus nodded. He looked at the floor for a second, then back up. The ones that surrendered, he said. Are they doing okay? Are they comfortable? The hall was very quiet. They exist, the Emperor said. They serve. They are alive. Marcus seemed to think about this. He nodded one more time, slowly. Then he said, "Thank you," and walked toward the door. He did not walk quickly. He did not look back. His footsteps were quiet on the black floor. The newspaper was tucked under his arm. The empty cup was in his hand. The 200 representatives watched him go. The generals watched him go. The Emperor watched him go. Nobody said anything until he was completely out of the hall and the great doors had closed behind him. Then the Pelori ambassador with the pale green skin turned to his neighbor again. "What just happened?" he whispered. His neighbor had no answer. General Harrock walked to the Emperor's side and spoke quietly. "He did not seem afraid, my Emperor." "No," said Vorkin. "He did not. Should that worry us?" The Emperor looked at the doors for a long moment. Outside, somewhere in the corridors of the great palace, a small human man was walking to the hangar bay with a newspaper under his arm and an empty cup in his hand. "Probably not," said the Emperor, but he was not entirely sure. And that was new. That was something he had not felt in a very long time. Marcus Hale's ship left the Empire's central station at a calm and unhurried speed. The station was enormous, the size of a small moon, ringed with gun platforms and patrol ships that bristled with weapons. As his small diplomatic vessel moved away from it, those patrol ships watched him go. They always watched him go. They had been watching human ships very carefully for years. They never saw anything unusual. That was the point. Marcus sat in the back of the ship with his feet up on the seat across from him. His aide, a young woman named Petra, was sitting at the small table with a data pad in her hands. She was 28 years old and very good at her job. She had been in the room during the declaration. She had not snickered. She had sat very still with her hands folded and her face completely blank, which had taken considerable effort. "You really could not help yourself, could you?" she said, but not looking up from the data pad. "I could have helped myself," Marcus said. "I chose not to. There are 400 trillion of them." "There are," he agreed. "And you snickered." "It seemed like the right response," he said. Petra set down the data pad and looked at him. "The right response to a declaration of war from the largest military force in the known galaxy was to snicker and read the newspaper. The farming report on page 12 was genuinely interesting," he said. "The wheat yield situation on New Bremen is going to be a problem if we do not deal with it before spring. Someone should look into that." Petra stared at him for a moment. Then she picked up the data pad again. "I will flag it," she said. Marcus looked out the small window at the stars. His face, in the quiet of the ship, looked different from how it had looked in the great hall. In the hall it had been relaxed. Here, alone, it was something else. Not afraid, not nervous, thoughtful, and in the way that a man is thoughtful when he is carrying something very heavy and has been carrying it for a long time. He had been playing this role for 11 years. Humanity had found the Galactic Empire's outer scouts 17 years ago. Before that, humans had believed they were alone or close to alone in the galaxy. The discovery of the Empire had changed everything overnight. It was not the exciting, a hopeful kind of change that people had dreamed about for centuries when they looked at the stars. It was the cold, sharp kind of change that comes when you are walking in the woods and realize you are not the biggest thing there. The Empire was ancient, it was powerful, and it expanded. That was what it did. It found civilizations, assessed them, and absorbed them. The strong ones were given more time before being absorbed. The weak ones were absorbed quickly. None of them were left alone. Humanity's leaders had read every piece of information they could find about the Empire in the first 3 years after discovery. They had studied how it had dealt with every civilization it encountered. They had looked at the species that had fought back and lost, the species that had surrendered and become servants, the species that had tried to negotiate and ended up as servants anyway. They had seen a pattern. The pattern was simple. The Empire was very good at seeing what was in front of it. Fleets, weapons, planets, population numbers, things that scouts could count and report. What it was not good at was looking in the dark. It sent its scouts along known routes, at known speeds. It mapped what was mappable. It understood what was understandable. It had never met a civilization that understood this about it and used it. Humanity decided to be the first. For 17 years, Earth's governments had been running 2 programs at the same time. The first program was the one the Empire's scouts could see. 17 planets, a modest fleet of older model warships, a population that was growing slowly, a civilization that was reaching outward carefully, politely, without any sudden movements. Humanity had even sent a few friendly trade delegations to minor Empire members. Small gifts, quiet conversations, nothing threatening. The second program was invisible. And 31 additional systems had been settled in complete silence. No official records that could be intercepted. No communications that used standard frequencies. The colonists who went to those systems went quietly, on ships that ran dark the moment they left known space. They built cities underground, on moons, inside asteroids. Nothing that a passing scout ship would see from a standard survey pass. The shipyards were the most important part. There were 9 of them, and spread across systems so distant and so dark that no Empire patrol had ever come close. They had been building for 13 years, not the kind of ships that humanity had been building for the Empire to see. Different ships, ships that had been designed by the best minds on Earth and all 31 hidden planets, ships designed around one specific question. What does a fleet need to beat the Empire? The answer had not been more guns. Bigger guns had never beaten the Empire. Every civilization that had tried to fight the Empire with pure firepower had lost. The Empire always had more firepower. The answer was speed, and silence, and something else. Marcus had been the one to suggest the newspaper. It had come from an old story, the kind that gets told in different forms across human cultures for thousands of years. The story of a person who pretends to be weak or small or careless until the moment when it matters to be none of those things. The person who lets the other side grow confident, who lets them feel certain, because certainty makes you slow. Certainty makes you take the wide road instead of watching the dark edges. The newspaper was a message. Not to the Empire. The Empire did not understand the message. That was fine. The message was for the humans in that room, for Petra and the quiet security detail at the back. It was Marcus saying, "We are ready." But I went into the heart of their power, and I sat down and I read the paper, and they did not scare me because we are ready. Petra had understood. She had kept her face blank and her hands folded. Now she looked up from the data pad again. "They are going to move the first fleet to the border within a week," she said. "Our people have already picked up the signals." "I know," Marcus said. "The 30-day window they gave us is a formality. They will push the fleet to the edge of our declared territory in that time and sit there. They want us to see it. They want us to spend those 30 days watching 9,000 warships sitting on our doorstep and thinking about surrender." "I know," he said again. "And the message goes out tonight?" she asked. "Tonight," he said. She nodded and went back to her data pad. The ship moved through the dark, and the stars outside were cold and beautiful and completely silent. And somewhere behind them, the Empire was preparing. It was moving its great ships and its great armies toward a border that it believed was the edge of humanity's real territory. Somewhere ahead, in the dark between stars, in places no scout had ever been, in shipyards built inside the bones of dead moons, people were working and had been waiting for a long time. Tonight, they would stop waiting. Marcus looked out at the stars and thought about wheat yields on New Bremen and about what was coming. He thought that the Emperor had seemed like an intelligent being. He thought that this was almost a shame. Intelligent beings tended to take it harder when they were surprised. He picked up the newspaper again and found the farming article. The wheat situation really was going to be a problem, and the first fleet of the Galactic Empire was a sight that no living being could look at without feeling small. 9,000 warships moving together through space looked like a city that had decided to get up and walk. The smallest ships were still larger than the biggest buildings most species had ever built. The biggest ships were so large they bent the light around them slightly. When they moved in formation, their engines made a combined output that could be detected by sensors 3 star systems away. They were not trying to be quiet. They never needed to be quiet. That was the point of having 9,000 warships. Admiral Sec was in command of the First Fleet. She was Drath, like the Emperor, but younger, only 180 years old, which in Drath terms made her relatively new to senior command. Or she had earned her rank by fighting a nasty border conflict on the Empire's eastern edge 8 years ago and winning it decisively. She was the kind of commander who planned every possible thing and then planned what to do if all her plans went wrong. She stood on the bridge of the Eternal Conquest, the flagship, and watched the stars move past on the long viewing screen. They were 3 days into the advance toward humanity's declared border. She had 17 days left before the deadline ended. "Sensor report," she said. Her sensor officer, a young Drath named Vel, looked at his screens. "Standard human signals from the known systems, Admiral. Radio traffic, commercial traffic, some defensive positioning of their smaller ships near the inner planets. Their official military channel broadcast a statement this morning." "What did it say?" Vel read from the screen. It said that the people of humanity have received the Empire's message and are in the process of deliberating. It asks for calm and requests that no civilian vessels be harmed during any military actions." Sec looked at the screen. "Deliberating," she said. "Yes, Admiral. They have 17 days left, and they are deliberating." "It appears so." She was quiet for a moment. Something about this bothered her. She had dealt with other civilizations in their final days before absorption, and they did not deliberate. They panicked. They sent frantic diplomatic messages. They moved their ships into positions that made no tactical sense but felt like doing something. They begged, or they threw everything they had at you in one desperate and hopeless charge. Or they went silent and simply stopped responding. Humanity was deliberating. She pulled up the intelligence files on the humans. She had read them before, but she read them again. 17 planets. The 42 warships on official record. Population of 11 billion. First contact with Empire scouts 9 years ago. Since then, trade relationships established with 4 minor member states. 1 minor diplomatic incident involving a border survey vessel that had been resolved quickly and quietly. The envoy, Marcus Hale, had been their representative for the last 6 years. He had visited the central station 3 times before this last visit. Nothing in the file was alarming. And as she put the file down and looked at the stars again, on the 14th day, something changed. It was not a dramatic change. It was the opposite of dramatic. The censor officer, Vel, came to Sec's side with a puzzled look on his face. "Admiral," he said quietly, "the human signals have stopped." "Stopped?" "All of them. Radio traffic, commercial channels, military broadcasts. Everything. 3 hours ago, it all went silent." Sec turned to face him fully. "Is all 17 systems?" "All 17, Admiral, simultaneously." She walked to the sensor station herself and looked at the screens. He was right. The space that humanity occupied was completely silent, not the silence of a civilization that had been destroyed. There were no explosion signatures, no debris fields, no emergency signals. Just silence, as if someone had flipped a switch. "Are our sensors functioning?" she asked. "Yes, Admiral. We are picking up stellar activity. Background radiation, standard readings from everything in range. Just no human signals." "Could they have shifted to a frequency we are not monitoring?" Vel looked uncomfortable. "We monitor every frequency that any known civilization uses, Admiral. They would have to be using something completely new." Something moved in Sek's chest. She was not sure what the word for it was. It was a cousin of the feeling the Emperor had felt after the envoy left the Great Hall. Not fear, exactly. And something quieter than fear, and in some ways worse. "Increase to full advanced speed," she said. "I want to reach the border in 3 days, not 7. "Admiral?" "Full speed," she said. "Now." They reached the border in 3 days. The border was an invisible line in space where humanity's officially declared territory ended. On one side was the Empire's domain. On the other side was human space. The First Fleet crossed it at full readiness, every weapon system active, and every shield at full power, every soldier at their post. On the other side, there was nothing. The 17 known human systems were empty, not destroyed, empty. The planets were there. The moons were there. The orbital stations were still intact. But every ship was gone. Every person was gone. Every living thing that could be moved had been moved. Even the animals and the crops and the stored food. It was as if humanity had known exactly when to leave and had left neatly, carefully, and without panic and without waste. Sek stood on the bridge of the eternal conquest and looked at the empty systems on the screen and felt something she had not felt since she was a very young soldier, seeing real combat for the first time. "Where are they?" she said quietly. Nobody answered, because nobody knew. Then Vel made a sound. It was a short, sharp sound. The sound a person makes when they see something unexpected. "Admiral," he said. His voice was very careful. "Oh, I am reading. Objects. On long-range sensors. Coming from..." He paused. He checked his screen again. He checked it a third time. "Coming from multiple directions, Admiral. From all directions." "How many objects?" Vel looked at the screen. Then he looked at Sek. There was something in his face that Sek did not like seeing in the face of a trained officer. "I am still counting," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "They are still appearing on the screen, and I cannot..." "There are a lot of them, Admiral." Sek walked to the sensor station and looked at the screen herself. Across the whole screen, from every direction, points of light were emerging from the dark. They were not using any signals. They were not broadcasting on any frequency. They were just appearing, moving fast, in absolute silence, from places that no scout had ever mapped and no Empire chart had ever marked. They were ships, human ships. And there were not 42 of them. Sek stood very still. Behind her, the bridge had gone completely quiet. The officers at their stations had stopped moving. Everyone was watching the screen. The points of light kept appearing, kept multiplying. From the dark edges of unmapped space, from directions that the Empire had never even looked, they came. Far away, on a diplomatic vessel that was now well outside the conflict zone, Marcus Hale set down the newspaper and picked up a warm cup of tea. He did not look at any screens. He did not need to. He already knew what was on them. He took a sip of his tea and watched the stars outside his window and thought that it was, all things considered, a very nice day. The Eternal Conquest was the largest ship in the First Fleet and the largest ship in the entire Galactic Empire. It had never retreated. In 600 years of the Empire's history, the flagship had never once turned around and gone the other way. It was not built for retreating. And it was not designed to accommodate the idea. Admiral Sec ordered a full stop, not a retreat, not an advance. A stop. She needed to count. She needed to understand what she was looking at before she did anything else, because she was a good commander. And good commanders do not charge into something they do not understand. It took her sensor team 4 hours to count the ships on the screen. Then they counted again. The number did not change. 67,000. 214 ships had emerged from the dark in the time it had taken the First Fleet to reach the center of what used to be humanity's known territory. They came from 31 different directions, which meant 31 different points of origin, which meant 31 different places that had been hiding human civilization and human shipyards and human people for a very long time. The First Fleet had 9,000 ships. Humanity had 67,000. And these were not the same kind of ships the Empire was used to facing. Sec's technical officer, a quiet and extremely competent Drath named Tor, spent 2 hours analyzing the ship designs and then came to Sec with a look on his face that was unusual for a technical officer. Technical officers liked certainty. Tor did not look certain. "They are fast," he said. "Much faster than anything we have on record. Their hull design is... I have not seen this before. The geometry is different. It scatters our targeting sensors. We get a reading, but it is imprecise. Our weapons lock systems would have significant difficulty getting a clean solution on them." "Can we adapt?" Sec asked. Tor thought about this. "With time," he said. "In an active engagement? No." Sec looked at the screen. 67,000 silent ships, sitting perfectly still in a wide formation that surrounded her fleet on all sides, except the direction they had come from. They had not fired, and they were not moving. They were just there, like a wall that had appeared overnight, and now they were waiting. They had left a corridor open, the direction the First Fleet had come from, the way home. That was not an accident. Sec knew it was not an accident. When you are trying to destroy an enemy, you surround them completely. When you are trying to send them a message, you leave them a door. She contacted the Emperor. The signal took time to reach the central station. Or she used that time to reread the intelligence files on humanity one more time. She found herself focusing on the part about the envoy, Marcus Hale, and his 3 previous visits to the station. She thought about how calm he had been. She thought about how the intelligence on humanity had always been accurate. 17 planets, 42 ships, 11 billion people, but how none of it had been a lie exactly. It had all been technically true. They had 17 official planets. And they did have 42 official warships. She did not want to think about how many unofficial ones they now clearly had. When she reached the Emperor, she told him everything. Vorkin listened without interrupting. That itself was unusual. When she finished, there was a long silence on the line. "How long have the ships been there?" he asked. "That is the question, my Emperor," she said. "Tor believes the close ones jumped to their current positions within the last 20 hours. Want the farther ones? We do not know. They were silent. We had no idea they were coming." Another silence. "What is your assessment?" he asked. Sec took a breath. She had been preparing the answer to this question since the ships first appeared. "I believe we were shown exactly what they wanted us to see. For years. Our scouts were shown the right planets, the right ships. We were given true information that was also incomplete. We never looked beyond what we were shown." She paused. I also believe that their envoy knew all of this when he sat in the Great Hall. He knew what was already moving before he arrived. He was never afraid because he had nothing to be afraid of. The silence on the line was very long this time. "And the corridor they have left open," the Emperor said. "Yes, my Emperor. That is also a message. Yes, she said. I believe so. Back on his diplomatic vessel, Marcus Hale received a signal. He read it. He set down his tea. And he picked up the newspaper, thought about it, and put it back down. Then he stood up, straightened his jacket, and walked to the front of the ship. We have been invited back, he said to Petra. She looked up from the datapad. By the Emperor? By the Emperor, he confirmed. She looked at him for a moment. Is it safe? Probably, he said. That is not the most comforting answer. No, he agreed. But it is an honest one. They turned the ship around. When Marcus walked back into the Great Hall of the Galactic Empire, it looked different. Not physically different. The black walls were the same. The floating lights were the same cold blue. The throne was still 50 steps up, but the feeling in the room was different. The 200 representatives were there again, but they were quieter. The military generals along the walls stood just as straight, but their faces were different. And they were the faces of people working very hard to look like nothing had changed. Emperor Vorkon did not come down the steps this time. He stayed on the throne. But he leaned forward slightly, and when he spoke, his voice was different too. Not small. Vorkon did not have a small voice, but different. Your people have made their point, he said. Marcus stood at the small table. The cup was there again. Petra had made tea. He did not sit down this time. He stood with his hands in his pockets, which was either very casual or very rude, and he did not seem concerned about which one it was. We were not trying to make a point, Marcus said. We were trying to answer a question. What question? The one you asked without asking, Marcus said. You wanted to know if we were weak. The declaration of war was a test, the way it always is with you. A test to see how we would respond. If we panicked, we were weak. If we begged, we were weak. If we did something sensible in the face of it, maybe we were not. The Emperor looked at him. And the newspaper? Marcus almost smiled. The newspaper was for us, not for you. It was to remind ourselves that we were not afraid, that we had done the work, that the test was yours, not ours. The hall was completely quiet. You have been preparing for 17 years, the Emperor said. We started the day we found your scouts, Marcus said. We hoped it would never come to this. We are not a species that wants war, not even a little. But we are a species that reads history. And history said that with you, if you are too small to matter, you get absorbed. If you are strong enough to be a real problem, you get negotiated with. He tilted his head slightly. We decided we would rather be negotiated with. Vorkon sat back on the throne. He was quiet for a long time. Around the hall, no one moved. No one whispered. Even the creatures in the pressurized pods were still. 67,000 ships, the Emperor said at last. Give or take, Marcus said, and you built them in silence. We are very good at being quiet when we need to be, Marcus said. We had a lot of practice. You were watching. The Emperor made a sound. It was difficult to read. It was not anger. It was something that in a human might have been called reluctant respect. What do you want, Envoy Hale? Marcus pulled his hands out of his pockets. He stood a little straighter, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet and clear. We want to be left alone. We want our planets and our people and our future. We want trade if you want trade. We want peace if you want peace. He paused. We do not want to fight you. We have never wanted that, but we will if we have to. And now you know we can. Vorkon looked at him for a very long moment. Then the Emperor of the Galactic Empire, the ruler of 4,000 worlds and 400 trillion beings, the leader of a civilization that had never in 600 years met a smaller power that gave it pause. He nodded. It was a small nod, barely a movement of his head. But in that room, with those witnesses, It meant everything. Marcus picked up his cup of tea. He took a sip. It had gone slightly cold, but that was fine. Outside the Great Hall, the first fleet of the Galactic Empire had turned around and was heading home. On the other side of the border, 67,000 human ships held their formation quietly, without any lights, without any signal, the way they had been trained to hold it, patient and steady in the dark. Petra sent a message from her datapad. 3 words. It read, "Well done, Marcus." He did not reply. He just finished his tea, folded the newspaper under his arm, and thought about wheat yields on New Bremen. Someone really did need to look into that.